everybody. This is the second time in a week I get to talk to the 2001 Nobel Prize winner for economics, Joseph Stiglitz. Joe, it is so good to see you again, even though we didn't get our recording.
Yeah, I can't believe that.
uh, 2020 World Press Freedom Index. What did you think of the findings for the next decade?
Oh, I thought it drew attention to a lot of the key issues that we're facing. In particular, today, uh, press freedom is not just about the classical right to tell, the ability to publish. It's about misinformation. It's about undermining the business model so that you can't get the news out there. And finally, it's about access to information, which at one point was we thought we had successfully addressed through Freedom of Information Acts, right to know laws, passed whistleblower laws to encourage those who had information to convey it to the relevant parties. But we've seen an attack on all of these pillars, in particular, the attack by the Republicans on the whistleblower law. It was so interesting in that context. No one denied that what he said was correct. You might argue there was a debate whether it was within the presidential discretion to do what he did,
Right.
but everybody recognized that it should be part of the public domain to assess what was going on. No justification for secrecy. Uh, so the whistleblower was doing his job in the way the law was designed. And yet, rather than making the discussion about what it should be, how well our whistleblower had law worked, had moved into the public domain something that should be discussed, and people may have different conclusions. There was a vicious attack against the whistleblower. And that is an example of a new dimension. It's always been there, but harassment of journalists and social media has played a very negative role, both in the spreading of disinformation and in facilitating harassment,
Yes.
putting online the addresses, making it easier people to make threats. So we have a new, you might call it news ecology.
Yes.
And in the beginning, many people talked about how this new news ecology democratized uh, access to information. It meant anybody could become a publisher.
Right.
Uh, but a couple years down the road, we now realize it hasn't worked out that way. And that in many ways, those with more money have the ability to distort this marketplace. How can you compete with people who can hire bots to disseminate disinformation, misinformation, if you're trying to put forward honest views about what is happening? So we've created a peculiar wild west of an underregulated information marketplace. It's not a market, it's a mafia market
Right.
where money and thuggery play
Right.
too big of a role.
global marketplace of information. And this information asymmetry is different in that landscape. Uh, where do you see, how do we roll this back, do we roll this back? The RSF report focused on how technology was one of the five contributing reasons. But in the last few years, it's been the game changer. They became the gatekeepers to the public sphere without the responsibility or the mission of journalists. They took it away from journalists. Tech platforms also became uh, the, the places where the credibility of journalists were attacked. Where do you see this heading? And I guess, given that money still drives this, um, how can we make this better?
So I think there are two essential ingredients. The first is there needs to be regulation and accountability. We now realize that they can do lots of harms. And we always knew there could be harms. We have regulations about crying fire in a crowded theater, about childhood pornography. But the magnitude of the harms in terms of incitement, hate, violence, it's just been increased enormously. So we need appropriate regulations. And rather than increasing accountability, what the US Congress did was to release them from any liability. So we really distorted this marketplace. We took away accountability from the most dangerous part of the whole ecology. So regulation and accountability is one step. I believe that access to accurate news, to information, to knowledge is a fundamental public good. And as a public good, it has to be publicly supported. And the countries in which there's the most trust in the media, like Sweden, are countries in which there is a strong public support.
Yes.
Now, you might ask, where are we going to get the money from? And the answer is the platforms have generated enormous amounts of money at low marginal cost, high ability to raise revenue, devastating effects on the rest of the media. And there's absolutely no doubt that they are a appropriate way of providing revenue through a taxation. What is so striking from a global perspective is how the platform firms have typically avoided taxation, just like they avoided accountability. So while they become the most lucrative parts of our economy, they excel in their ability to avoid fiscal responsibility, as well as the other kinds of responsibility, so that they've not been paying their fair share of taxes. If we tax them, use some of that revenues to create a better information knowledge ecology, I think we can make inroads in trying to recreate a kind of informed marketplace of ideas.
The second question is about the impact of the coronavirus, this pandemic. Extraordinary measures, extraordinary powers have been given to leaders all around the world to deal with this virus. How do we get that power back? How will the people get that power back, given that fear is driving this now? Fear, and real fear, right, for our lives.
Well, whenever we cede power, we need to cede it with appropriate checks and balances. And so we should never just give dictatorial powers. We have to have oversight. That's one of the big lessons of the Enlightenment 200 years ago. Famous quote, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And unfortunately, in many countries, there are leaders who do not understand the principles of democracy. The United States has a leader now who does not understand the roles of checks and balances, separation of powers, independent bureaucracies, of judges, the role of an independent media.
Right.
So he simply doesn't understand what it takes to make a democracy work. And it's going to take a lot of work of citizens throughout the country to say, uh, you are undermining democracy. And, it's been you might call it a civic lesson, uh, but one that we are learning at great cost and in a way dividing our society. But the U.S. is lucky in having strong institutions
Institutions.
that are fighting back. Um, uh, a lot of people who are very committed to fighting back. And even with all his powers, he doesn't have the power uh, to go after them in the way that he might like to. Other countries, there are not so lucky, and so it will be a struggle. I think the media is going to have to play an extraordinarily important role in that struggle because some of these erosions of democracy, as you say, happen gradually and almost naturally. When you have a pandemic, you want a czar. You want somebody to take charge. Uh, and in a way, the irony in the United States is where in those areas where we needed somebody to take charge, like in making sure everybody had a mask, making sure that there were tests, our demagogue president didn't do anything. So where there would have been an advantage for strong but limited action, it wasn't taken. Um, and the dangers are, and the virtue, the dangers of not having a free press, and the virtues of having a free press are illustrated what happened just in the last few days. Um, the president uh, reflected that disinfectants kill viruses and suggested, well, maybe there's some way of getting that disinfectant inside of you to kill the virus inside of you. Of course, the doctors were horrified. This is the kind of thing you would get, kind of misinformation you would get on a social media, a quack doctor. People will, if they listen to that, will die.
Right.
And fortunately, we still have a free press that says, you got to be crazy. And we tell the president, we can tell the president, you're off your rocker. And you have to be alert. So this is not only the president not doing the leadership, but actually being extraordinarily dangerous to ordinary citizens.
Let me just toss one question from the audience because I know you also have to go. But this one is interesting. How can media survive the onslaught unleashed by popular leaders against independent media and journalists? How will Google, Amazon, Facebook, and scores of other applications being used by regimes around the world to create an Orwellian society be stopped? How can independent journalists survive?
Well, I think this goes back to what I said before. First, we have to have a regulatory framework. We have to have broad support for an independent media, which I think includes government support, but citizenship support, foundation support, broad support. I mean, I think there is certainly in the United States increasing awareness of the importance of an independent media, the dangers of Fox News. In a way, it's independent, but it's captured by the White House. And it was propagating views about the coronavirus that were just false until the president changed his mind, and then they changed on a dime. And so you saw what we castigate as government propaganda being done by a private media.
Right.
And of course, other countries have seen that. In Turkey, you have media that can be private, but basically the cronies of the president. So I think there's citizens understand the importance of having an independent media. Never more have they understood better than they do today. I think they have to advocate through the political process regulations. So the regulations on political acts, on targeting, very important. And we know that the dangers of misinformation, the Swift boat incident against Kerry, who had been a hero, undermined lies, had a very big political effect. One can't underestimate the dishonesty that can appear in politics. But the new social media has given force to this like nothing we've ever seen. And that's why we have to have strong regulation. Even if the Constitution talks about freedom of speech, freedom of press, there's no right to virality, no right to engage in these social harms and the magnitude that they're doing. And how we balance the benefits and the costs is a question that our democracies will have to debate. But what is clear is we are not yet done it right.
Yeah, I completely agree, having lived through some of that. The last question, Joe, is about what you do, which is the economics of everything, right? This coronavirus is going to gouge the global economy, gouge all of our countries, and have an impact on news organizations. We become even weaker in this. What do you see moving forward? How bad will it get? What can we do to survive?
Well, I think this is likely to be as deeper even than the Great Depression. We know a little bit more about how to manage the economy than we did 90 years ago. But we are as politically divided as we were 90 years ago. When President Roosevelt wanted to take certain actions, the conservatives, the Republicans said, no New Deal. They voted against Social Security. They voted against labor legislation. The Supreme Court impaired. They're doing lots of things. So we had a battle 90 years ago, and then we thought we won the intellectual battle. But then came Reagan and Trump, the Koch brothers, and the old ideas resurfaced. And we're now seeing a reincarnation in the United States. The Republicans didn't want to support testing, didn't want to support hospitals, didn't want to support paid sick leave so that people who were contagious would have an incentive to go to work. Can you believe that? To me, this was a real emblematic of selfishness writ large, putting the country at risk to save what should be, to save a few dollars, which should be a basic aspect of a minimum work standard. Um, so we're going to have to fight those battles again. And that's what has me worried. I believe we have the knowledge to prevent another Great Depression. But I don't know whether our politics will allow us to do it. There are those who want to take this occasion to give another big gift to our corporations and to take this as an occasion to downsize government, to pursue a political agenda, even if it has enormous harms to our society as a whole. And if that's the case, I think there is a real risk that we will go into a very deep depression.
Gosh, I hate to end on such a horrific note, right? But I guess that's the reality that we're facing. There's so many more questions I'd love to ask you, but I know you're strapped for time. I wanted to
Yeah.
say thank you. We've been
Okay.
speaking with Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz. Thank you for your
Good.
time.
Nice to talk to you. Nice to talk to
Nice
you.
to see you
Good.
again.
Bye. Yes, see you
Bye-bye.
again. Bye-bye.